All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Everybody's here. This is Len, obviously. I want to welcome, I guess, Steve, it's your first meeting. And Jennifer, it's yours as well. So I guess returning are Chuck, Jennifer, and myself. So on the agenda today is obviously financial statements, two different periods. I think it's FY19 and FY18. The last meeting, I believe we had a draft of 18, and now it's final, and 19 is final as well. So we would like comments on that. We also have to review the minutes, and I did want to reorganize and vote on and vote on the committee. See, we'll lead it. This is my this is probably my last year. My term is up. I'll still be living in Easton next year, but I'm hoping seasonally to be somewhere else and away. So that's underway.
Good for
So,
you.
yeah, I'm getting to that. I'm only 60, but at least seasonally, I think COVID's kind of proven that people can work not in their offices, and I'm kind of hoping for that. So anyway, we haven't met since November. I did want to go over the minutes, so we can vote on them. Wendy told me that even if you weren't at the last meeting, you can take time to look at the minutes and you can still vote. Jennifer, Star, myself, and Chuck, I mean, I'd like for us at least to have a majority to approve the minutes. Before we move on, one of the reasons we haven't met in a while is Roberta, who was a member of the committee and also of the finance committee. I was always trying to make sure that everyone could be in all of our meetings, and it was tough getting all 5 people together. And Roberta, as a matter of fact, was working not remotely, but was actually working, I believe, in Milwaukee for a while, and I tried to accommodate her. I really want to say that I value Roberta's contributions to this committee. A great member, asked amazing questions and understood the town's financials probably as well as anyone. I think we'll all miss her. So I want to just thank Roberta. We get that in the minutes. So with that, we'll do the reorganization a little bit later. I'd like to go into the minutes and get them approved. Has everyone had a chance to read them yet?
I have. I actually think that you might need an edit.
Sure.
It says the second. Let's see. After committee reorganization, 1, 2, 3. The third paragraph. Berkowitz asked Nightingale if she would make a graph on how much the debt has grown. I think that was the pension.
Yes.
Assessment.
It was not the debt. It was we were specifically talking about the pension itself and the percentage of the budget. And I believe I asked whether it was percentage of the total budget that was going to repayment of the pension. And what does it say in the minutes right now? Hold on. I only have one screen. I should have used my work computer where I have two.
Right now it just reads make a graph on how much the debt has grown or how much it has shrunk. And that was actually the only point in the minutes that I thought needed a little bit of clarification as well.
Okay, we can change them now to Berkowitz asked Wendy Nightingale how much of the percentage of the annual town budget and whether it was an increase or a decrease repayment of the pension has grown or decreased or something to that
Well,
effect.
it's not a repayment of the pension. This is our contribution into
A
Bristol County
contribution,
retirement system, right?
Repayment's not good.
Assessment.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. But
Okay.
what percentage our contribution is of the total budget as compared to the previous year? That's what I wanted to know.
Okay. So let me just see. Is anybody on taking minutes?
I don't see, Roseanne has not logged on.
Okay, but she'll be able to you view the recording. Got it.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So do we want to maybe nail down the wording and that way we can vote to accept the minutes as amended?
Yes, I'd love to. We have to vote tonight because these
Okay.
minutes are old. I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah.
it's still fresh enough in my mind that I definitely remember that. That's what I was getting at with that.
Okay.
So
So how about if we change the word then? So Berkowitz asked Nightingale if she would make a graph on how much the pension assessment
Yes.
has grown or shrunk against
As a
the,
percentage of the whole budget?
yes.
yeah, yes, as a percentage of the entire budget. So I'll read that back. Berkowitz asks Nightingale if she would make a graph on how much the pension assessment has grown or shrunk as a percentage of the entire budget.
Yeah, and I think by graph I probably did mean more than 1 year. Like I
Yep.
wanted to see a trend.
Yep, and that was supplied. So
Perfect.
that was one of the exhibits in the document. So okay, so then I didn't have any other areas that I would suggest an edit. Does anybody else?
Okay, then
Oh,
let's
fine with everything else.
okay, let's vote. Does anyone want to bring a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved. Chuck?
Okay. Second, Len. Okay. All in favor?
And should
Want to
this
do
be,
Want to
should
do
we
a
just do a
roll?
roll call?
Oh,
Okay.
yes, yes, we are doing that in meetings now.
Pretty
Oh,
standard.
we are.
Glad you mentioned that.
And why don't we just use the members present? Oh, shoot, no, that was from the last time. Why don't we go in order of, let's see, members present on, no, that doesn't work. Hold on.
I see Roseanne's on now.
Yes.
Come on. Okay.
Okay, so why don't we, Len, actually, why don't you just call out to each of us? That way we don't
Okay.
have to memorize an order.
Okay. Chuck?
Chuck, yes?
Okay. Steve?
Steve, yes.
Okay. Jennifer Starr?
Yes, Star, yes.
Okay. Jennifer Stacy?
Stacy abstain.
Okay. Len Berkowitz? Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
I just wanted to add too that I do have a spreadsheet for that.
All right. Where?
Did you
Okay.
get that, Len?
Did you send that out?
I feel like I sent it to you. I don't remember now if I sent it to the whole committee.
I got it in the bundle you sent last week that had the financials, the letter, the management letter. It was included in that bundle. It was an Excel
Okay.
spreadsheet.
Okay.
Okay. I want to open it just so we can all take a look at it and, just discuss it. I want to open it. Let me see if I have it with me.
I have it here. I could,
You
you
want
want me
it-
to share it on the screen?
Yeah, could you share it on the screen? That would be great.
Yeah, I'll
You're a lot
try.
better at this than I am. So and I know it's your first time leading me, one of these, and I appreciate it, and everyone else does.
Share screen. Uh-oh. Wait, I thought I knew that. Oh, wait, share screen. Is that,
Yep, I can see
is that
it.
working?
Yes. Thank you. Um,
Kind of tiny to me.
yeah,
Is
no, I
it's
see
hard
it
for,
very,
it's hard for me to, I can't like see what
Of
you
course,
are seeing.
fonts, yeah, the font size.
it's on my screen and I'm using a MacBook Air. It's very good. It's clear. I'm
It's
gonna
actually
go,
better. I turned
I'm
mine
gonna read,
sideways, it's better.
I'm gonna read the numbers and it basically confirms, I think, okay, it just disappeared. It basically
Oh,
confirms.
sorry, I'm,
No,
Yeah.
don't worry.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Like I said, this is new for me. I apologize.
No, don't worry about it. Basically, it confirms, I guess, what we had all suspected. Thanks, Wendy, that in 10 years, it's gone up 1.25%. And it goes up every year steady. The pension as a percentage of the overall budget. So it's pretty predictable, correct?
Well, I think the takeaway here is actually so the pension percentage increase has gone up an average of about 6%, whereas the general fund operating budget has only gone up an average of 2.75%. So the pension assessment is growing at a faster rate than the general fund budget.
Exactly. So, while even when we can increase the revenue of the town, when we do, a large share of that increase is just going to fund the budget. I know very few people are on, maybe they can watch the recording, but and I don't know what this works out to be in gross numbers, but if this keeps going, I mean, my conclusion is you'd almost have to override to cover the pension after a while. So, and then when I was on FinCom, I mean, this was something, and that was, probably pre that FY 2010 when I was on FinCom, much more than that, is that this was something we had discussed way back at that time. So, it looks like a small amount every year, but I would say in the next 10 years at this rate, it's going to be 6.5% of our total budget, and it's just going to keep growing.
A lot.
Yeah, I don't know what can be, when we talk to Ed later on, I guess I'd like to know if I'm sure they are. Our last meeting with Melanson, I guess we said that every town is basically handling this the same way. How they fund the pension, and I guess it's just one of those things that it's hard to deal with because it seems small all the time, but I think it's a big problem. And and I obviously FY19 we didn't have at our last meeting, but it's steady. And I don't know, if this gets discussed enough, when people contemplate performance of the town. I guess this is never really considered. I mean, people like to, point fingers at people on inefficiencies of managing the town. But when you have growth in an area which we just can't control, I mean, it's got to have an impact on the way the town runs. So yeah, that was my only point. And thank you Wendy, thank you for putting this together. So
Sure. One thing I wanted to
go ahead.
add,
I want everyone to discuss.
I did want to add something, but I'm gonna come back. So one thing I did want to mention though was that something that factors into this assessment, obviously, is the amortization of the unfunded liability.
Yep.
And the last valuation had the funding schedule for Bristol County going out as far as 2028.
Okay.
So, and that would amortize that liability. After 2028, on that particular schedule, once the liability was fully funded, that pension assessment would drop significantly. So, you know, kind of a lot of this too is where it's sort of payback for when communities were on the pay-as-you-go pension payment system for, you know, a number of years. It's very kind of similar, you know, with the OPEB liability too, with the health insurance. Like right now, we're on a pay-as-you-go, and we have a very small OPEB trust, but without funding that, you know, years down the road, you're gonna kind of end up in a similar situation. So I know our hope is, at least at some point when this is fully amortized, to then basically take that amount and start putting it towards OPEB. However, Bristol County did just recently have a new valuation, and they have a new actuary, and some of the data assumptions have changed, and that is very likely going to push the funding schedule out, but it's not really going to give us any relief on what the increases are going to be in the assessment. So I'd say we're probably going to be looking still going forward at increases of around 8%, or between 7 and 8%.
Which is a little more than we've been, right? I mean, if you put that graph back up, I mean, we've been a little over 6, correct?
Yeah, it varies. There's a couple of things that also weigh into that. Is once they come up with the forecast of appropriations, they will also offer an early pay discount. We've always taken advantage of that for as long as it's been available, because it does save us a significant amount of money. It saved us for fiscal 21 like $90,000. So, but you got to pay your pension assessment in one fell swoop, which is, you know, $4.5 million in July, versus, you know, 2 semi-annual payments. But to save $90,000 for us, we feel that it was worth it. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay.
The other thing too is as the liability changes, payrolls change, employment changes, Easton, as a percentage of the Bristol County pension system, that weighted average percent could also change, and that could also influence what the assessment is.
Have we grown in comparison to other towns in Bristol County?
I don't have an answer
Or
for you
cities
on
and
that
towns?
right now, but I don't think it's changed significantly, but the numbers are so large that even like a 1% change would be significant for us.
I mean, unfortunately, you're not seeing an end to the 6% growth. If anything, you're seeing an 8% growth. And, you know, after we retire, we still have the OPEB. So, I mean, this is going to continue to eat at our budget and our, our 2.5 increase, is getting eaten up considerably by the growing function of this, of this outlay.
Mhm.
There's just no way around that.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. And also another thing to note too is that on this last valuation, it would appear, I've only gotten a presentation, so I haven't heard what the recommendations are, but the various scenarios that are presented are showing greater than 7 years, because typically if this was going to be funded in 2028, we'd have 7 years left. But now you're looking at probably more like at least 10, possibly more, depending on what the board adopts. And they're meeting tomorrow, and it's a Zoom meeting. I'll be attending that meeting.
Okay. I'm assuming that we're going to meet, at least, one more time through the calendar year. probably, and I'd like the results of that meeting and what happens with this there. So I mean, just you know, to me, it's just a huge chunk of what's going on. So yeah, thanks, Wendy. I really appreciate you updating this and you know and updating the graph and letting us know what's going on. So it sounds like what was 8 years you think could be 11 or 12 though, right?
Right.
Okay.
Do you know, Wendy, off the top of your head, do we have a ballpark for how the funded status has improved over the past 10 years? Any idea of where we were, say, 10 years ago and where we are now?
I don't know where we were 10 years ago. The last ratio I think had us at about 67.7% funded. That's likely going to change depending on what kind of funding schedule they adopt, and also what kind of discount rate that they adopt.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
the discount rate that had been used previously was 7.75%.
Ooh,
They felt that was high.
yeah.
So yeah, so they're looking
Got
at picking a discount rate of between 7.5% and 7.25%.
It's still safe.
It's still pretty
Yeah.
aggressive, but
Yeah.
okay. I'm not on that board, so I
No, I'm not
guess
either. I think that's pretty high.
that's really
So,
aggressive. Seems it. Maybe
I
there's
feel like for
reasons for it.
OPEB we use like 3 3/4,
Yeah.
maybe like 3.75. I know it's a lot lower for OPEB.
yeah. Why wouldn't it be the same? I mean, I would think, 3 to 5.
Different
right?
liability pools and
Yeah.
Different investments too.
yeah.
Okay. 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 I can't get that on my money. I don't know who
Right.
knows. I think I'm down for the year, but that's okay. That's not. I don't want to complain too much.
Yeah. So depending on what they pick, that's going to change what the unfunded liability is.
Yeah.
That will change the funded ratio.
All right. Hey, all right. Thanks, Wendy. I do want to get to the financials. I think we approved or we looked at the drafts, but we couldn't vote on them. Were those FY18? Were those the FY18 financials? It should
I
be in
feel
the
like
minutes.
we
everything
already
up.
took care of 18.
Oh, so we were caught up? Okay, so 18 was finalized? Okay, so we're caught up on 19 then. Okay. All right, so why don't we do this? Ed, you can introduce yourself and let's go through the financials. If you can go over changes. We just spent a good amount of time on the big chunk of what we always talk about, which is the impact of the OPED and the pension on the budget, but going over other significant changes. And I believe this is your first go around with us, right? I think we asked to change the audit partner
Mhm.
on it, just as a matter of best practice. So I do, we do appreciate you taking over and just as a best practice having another auditor take from the same firm, and your firm's done a great job, so thank you. But going through the financials, I also I forget what your predecessor's name was, and I
Scott
should
McIntyre.
Scott, right, who was with us for years. I always asked him, anything significant that pops out or changes or that's different from other towns you look at. So, uh, I'll want to know those things as well. So,
Sure.
with that, if you want to go through these, that's great.
Okay. Well, this is my maiden voyage, so hopefully I do as well as Scott did. Happy to be here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that introduction. And in case some of you didn't hear, my name is Ed Boyd. I'm the partner for the Town of Easton's audit. And tonight we'll be going over the FY 2019 financial statements. I know we're in a little bit of a different setting here, so I'm prepared to do what do anything at the pleasure of the committee here. Now, it sounds like, Mr. Chairman, do you want to go through individual pages in the financial statements? Do you want me to give you financial highlights? I'm prepared to do either, whatever is going to be best for this group.
I think I know Jennifer and I probably have been on the committee the longest. I don't know what other people want to see. I mean, I would say highlights, big pictures, big changes is what I like to go through.
Okay.
Like I said, you know, anything that pops out at you that we're spending on different percentage than like towns, I'd like to know. Um, you know, uh, but I want everyone to ask questions, especially new people getting, you know, a fresh look at the financials outside of the committee. I think, you know, it's great to hear others and new voices and new questions. So,
Fantastic. What I'll do is, and for the group here, please, if there's anything that whether you can't hear me or you want some further explanation, please feel free to just stop me, and I'll just take a step back here. But what I'd like to communicate first is that the audit went very well. I know we're here in July 21st, but we were done in the spring. And as Mr. Chairman had mentioned earlier, I think just, you know, trying to really time the group and try to get everyone on board was really the hiccup, and that leads us to where we are today. It's certainly not indicative of how the audit went or how things were closed up. So I just wanted to make that clear. I'd also like to take this time to thank finance personnel, both folks over at Town Hall, Wendy, Marilyn over at the school, and the related staff. An audit process is not easy, and we certainly understand that. And everyone involved really gives us the attention that's necessary for us to conduct an effective and efficient audit. So before we really get into some things, I just want to say thank you for the attention that we get, and I think we you know, continue to build off of good working relationships. I've been working on the town of Easton's audit for about 3 years now. And since that time, I think we just continue to build off really good positive relationships. And that word positive, I think you're going to hear quite frequently throughout this discussion, because I think that's going to be the theme. I think when we talk about the general fund and more short-term items, I think it's going to be very positive. Just had a fantastic introduction to pension and OPEB. So clearly I'm talking to a very educated group here, which makes my life very easy. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. Now, some required communications for you folks. We found the books and records to be in good working order. The accounts were reconciled on a timely basis. There were no disagreements with management in the application of generally accepted accounting principles. No material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control were reported. We did issue a management letter with some recommendations, but I largely look at some of those as some housekeeping items that likely won't surface next year. But we'll get to that after we go over some of the financial highlights. Most importantly, we've issued an unmodified or a clean opinion, which means that your financial statements are presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles in the United States of America. So that's step one. You always want to know what the opinion is, and anything other than a clean or an unmodified opinion typically raises the antennas, but that is not the case in East. Where we'll start is the general fund, and some of the metrics that we're going to be getting into and what we'll talk about is it's designed to kind of follow what traditional, or I would say most informed users of the financial statements are. And that's typically the credit rating agencies. So a lot of these discussion points are going to essentially mirror some of the things that they look at. And talk about, as Mr. Chairman, you wanted to know earlier, is, you know, how do you stack up with some of your peer communities or other communities that I don't know, maybe they have a more increased bond rating, and so we'll get into things like that of, you know, what some of the differences are and answer any questions. But over the last 4 years, you've seen a positive trend in your unassigned fund balance. That is, you can talk about pension all day, you can talk about OPEB, and those are very, very important. But I will tell you that the first place informed reader of the financial statements is going to go to is your general fund balance sheet, and they're going to look at your unassigned fund balance. Essentially, that amount is largely unrestricted or unencumbered. And I say that somewhat loosely because your unassigned fund balance largely represents your free cash and your general stabilization fund. So when I said it's unencumbered, I understand that there's still restrictions in utilizing stabilization funds, but nonetheless, that is a rainy day fund and does get factored into the reserves of the community. So over the last 4 years, the town's unassigned fund balance has actually gone from about $4.5 million to about $5.5 million. We've added about $1 million in the last 4 years. Just as importantly, as we talked about the budget going up, when you look at your unassigned fund balance, thanks, Wendy. That's very helpful. So there it is. Your unassigned fund balance, the third number up from the bottom. And again, this is the first thing that a user of the financial statements is going to look at. And actually, while we have the financial statements up, Wendy, if you don't mind, maybe going to page 9, please. And I just think since we have this available, we might as well look at a few things here. But at the top of page 9, what you're going to see here, this is in what's called your MD&A, or your management's discussion analysis. The MD&A comes before the basic financial statements, and it's largely supposed to stand on its own and help paint the picture of what happened with key accounts and where balances are as of fiscal year end. And this is a table that is, I'll say, pretty well sought after, because what it does is it shows how key fund balance numbers, your unassigned and your total, how it's trending over the prior year, but also as a percentage of your general fund expenditures, how much that represents. Essentially looking at it from how much reserves do we have, assuming no revenue coming in. And that number, just as importantly, has increased up over the last 4 years too. So that percentage has gone from about 6% to the 6.7% that you're seeing. And again, that's a combination of your free cash and your general stabilization. So very good positive theme there. And it didn't just happen too. I think when you look back over the last 4+ years, you'll see that I think there's been some good estimates when it comes to revenue, and I think there's been some stringent budget control. So there's been favorable turnbacks in revenue, favorable turnbacks in expenses, softened by use of free cash. And what you'll see is, I think in those last 4 years, is that the amount of free cash that's been utilized has largely been regenerated. I was looking at to an extent, I was looking at some budget documents on the website earlier, and I know that that's one thing that the town administrator has been discussing, and I believe this group too, of how much free cash has been utilized for the operating budget, and trying to reduce that to the extent possible. Now, I think in looking at over the last 4 years, and where that unassigned fund balance number has gone, I think that is something that's happening, and I would look at this as a credit strength. Now, to answer the question that was posed earlier about, how are we in relation to some peer communities? When I look at you and when I say peer communities, I do throw in AAA rated communities in there, just because I think there's probably some desire to at least entertain that discussion about what, maybe what the missing link is. And so I was looking at that a little bit earlier, and in looking at the Moody's bond rating, it seems like increasing the reserves and liquidity is really the key driver, and potentially moving forward with that bond rating, coupled with dealing with some of the long-term liabilities. But again, those are long-term liabilities, and they need to be managed as such. But equally as important is looking at your reserves. And I would say the 6.7% is within I would say a range of, between 5 and maybe 7.5% is fairly consistent for the AA3 rated communities. But in trying to potentially get over the hump and start climbing the ladder, if you will, that indicator is probably one that would need to creep up closer to probably the 10% range. Now, in looking at Wendy's budget analysis earlier, that's something that it's probably going to be a little challenging in time, just given the, how much the fixed costs and the pension and the, related healthcare is really, taking up a lot of that pie, if you will. But at least in trying to start the discussion of, well, what do we need to keep looking at? I think this is a critical driver, is looking at where your free cash numbers are, where your general fund stabilization balances are, and trying to continue setting aside money to the extent that's practical is something that is will be looked at again as a credit strength. I'll pause there just to see if there might be any questions.
Yeah, I have a question, and Wendy, maybe you can pipe in as well on this one. In the past, I think the growth of fees and assessments, was it the sales taxes and things like that we had? I believe we've never really put that in the budget. We've kind of used that, as a cushion, right? Is that down this year, you think, or?
Yeah, fiscal 20.
Yeah, 20 or 21 even. I mean, I don't know if you know what's coming in, but I always thought that was one thing that's always helped us, grow the free cash, because we never budget for the increase in, I guess, what is it? Auto sales tax fees. I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly. Have we not budgeted that and then just used that for free cash?
No, we do budget for that. Do you mean the excise tax?
Yeah.
Or the meals tax?
I think it was the excise tax or the change. I thought we never budgeted for growth in that, and that the delta in that was, something that we counted on for free cash or to increase free cash. Am I remembering incorrectly?
We used to always try to be a little more conservative in projecting what that revenue was going to be. It's kind of a tricky revenue to predict because the first real large commitment, as they call it, or the first huge billing doesn't come out until like January. So you're already halfway into your year before you even kind of know what that is. And the way the excise taxes go is that every year the value drops of the vehicle, it drops 10%. So if your taxes are increasing, then people are buying newer cars, and to help offset that decline in value.
Yeah, but that's what's been going on like the last 10 years, and with and it's been great for free cash, because all of that excess has gone into free cash, something we hadn't budgeted for. But it was kind of like something we knew was there, and it was a great thing. And I guess my question of you and Ed is, and this current year, I mean, aren't you anticipating getting rocked a little bit on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we had to, we did this budget for fiscal 21. We had to scale back our estimates for, it was really challenging budget, because we had to scale back not only our estimates for state aid, Chapter 70 funding, and unrestricted general government aid, which we dropped those amounts by, I think, like over 8%. And then we also reduced our local receipts, which is what motor vehicle excise would factor into, and meals tax and all of those. We also dropped those projections by, I can't remember exact percentage, but I believe it was at least 5%. Because we are anticipating that, you know, things are going to be slower in fiscal 21. We definitely saw a slowdown in fiscal 20. I will tell you that. As far as like our receipts and everything go, we for a while I was concerned that we were, you know, not going to break even, but we did at least break even with what we budgeted. So we did not have a budgetary shortfall, but we've really only been over budget by about maybe like 35,000. We did very well in a lot of our local receipts, except for motor vehicle excise. That I think was more of a, I think the receipts were not going to be as much as the year before, but we were, I think, just under our budget target for this year. I think that was more of a collection issue than a billing issue. Because of the coronavirus, we did extend the payment due dates for those types of bills to June 30th. So, you know, some people probably going to pay, you know, in July instead. And also we did have a slowdown in our real estate tax collections, and we did give people an extra month to pay, but, you know, with the unemployment rate at 17%, you know, a month wasn't going to cut it for some people. So our collections, you know, did fall short for this year. But what offset that was how well we did in some other areas for the local receipts.
And
aside from motor vehicle and meals tax too, because meals tax was down also by about $53,000. We had budgeted, I think, 400,000, and we took in about 350.
so, how does town management react to this and COVID? I mean, to me, the obvious, not obvious, but you know, maybe a clear thing would be to cut down on capital expenditures.
Well,
Did you do anything in that area?
We did do that. I mean, the town administrator was all over this. You know, when this started happening, he immediately put in spending freezes, hiring freezes. He even, you know, for next year, he negotiated some wage freezes with some of the bargaining units, was able to do that. We had to eliminate some positions.
Reorganizations.
Yeah, we did departmental reorganizations. We had a very limited capital budget. We really only did the things that we had to do, like an ambulance, some things for the school wastewater treatment plant. Actually, I think I have that list here.
That seems to be a pretty consistent theme too. Capital,
Yeah.
capital, and OPEB contributions seem to have been the first two to. Many communities have paused, I think, some of their larger OPEB contributions and tried to smooth out their capital plan and just kind of push some things off 3, 4, 5 years down the road. That does seem to be a pretty consistent theme.
So they group them. This creates greater amortization later on of the OPEB contributions, correct? So we're pushing it out.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we did not have a planned contribution to that fund this year. I mean, I think if things trended very well, then maybe we would have looked at possibly transferring some money out of the employee benefits and insurance budget, because we did have some turnbacks there. But given everything going on, that was not going to happen this year. So yeah, the capital budget was pretty minimal. The ambulance, defibrillators, protective clothing, some mobile data terminals for fire and rescue, school wastewater treatment plant, they needed some things, and then some water capital. Water, you know, does have funds for that, and they recently had a rate increase and a rate study, and those increases built in plans for some of these capital items.
Okay. I have a question for Jennifer. The schools operationally, did we save any money there by closing down schools at least? you know, the physical schools themselves?
Yeah, there ended up being we were able to negotiate. The biggest savings was negotiating transportation. So initially, um, there was a holdup as to whether or not we could pay the bus companies at all. And we have two bus vendors, one for special education out of district and then one for in district. And there is a state rule that prevents us from paying for services not rendered. That was waived specifically for school transportation because we want the bus companies to still be in business when we do return to school. So not paying them at all was not deemed to be the best way to go. So we negotiated along with other towns a rate for those services that basically just was intended to cover some of their ongoing expenses, but not, we weren't paying for fuel, we weren't paying for salaries during that time, et cetera. So that was a substantial savings. I think it ended up resulting in a couple 100,000. But the flip side of that, and there was some savings in, fuel and utilities and things like that, by not heating the buildings and not having all the lights on. But there was some unemployment from substitutes. My understanding is that the town is picking that cost up using COVID funds. There were expenses for a Meals on the Go program. So we were feeding 70 families. We're doing that. And then there's also lost revenue. So the spring is a very big time for revenue from rentals. So all of those dance recitals that happen in May, renting out the field to the lacrosse league and to other people that use the turf fields and things like that. So there was revenue loss that our understanding is that COVID funding cannot be used to cover or make up for any of that at this time. So net, I think based on how the negotiations worked with the bus company, there'll be a return to the general fund of some funding as of June 30th. And then hopefully that can get reallocated or
Wouldn't the
whatever
bus
at the
company
November
have
meeting.
eligible for PPP loans?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The bus company, you said we kept continuing to pay that. Couldn't they have taken out forgivable,
Yes, that was up to the bus companies as to whether or not they chose to do that, or whether or not they had their employees on unemployment. I believe the negotiated rate ended up being 30%. So what we pay was basically to cover their costs for overhead, but not paying salaries and fuel and things like that. And that, from hearing from other school committees, is in line with what other school committees negotiated.
Okay, that makes sense. I just wanted
Yep.
to ask the question.
Yep.
Okay, and Ed, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just I did want to get into that during this meeting, and I figured.
No, please.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked, because it's a question that gets commonly asked, and it's a totally reasonable expectation that, well, if the buildings aren't open, we must have been saving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's just not the case. And then when you add in the lost revenue, there's technology expenses we had to pay. We had to get software for some of the remote learning, so there were unexpected expenses and revenue losses. Yep. That offset a lot of those savings.
Yeah, I've got a question for you as well, and I haven't really paid attention to the schools maybe like I should have or used to when I had kids in the school system. Considering that all the kids are doing remote learning, did we have any cash outlays to increase to buy laptops or anything like that? How did that work?
We used the fleet of laptops or Chromebooks. So we used the fleet that we had available and loaned those out to families who needed them. The families still have them. We allowed families to keep them over the summer, anticipating that some would benefit from having technology over the summer. We also kept a lot of the remote learning plans and and resources that were provided online open over the summer. So if students wanted to do some supplemental work, they could. We do anticipate that we will need to replace many of those because they might not have been in great shape to begin with. And when they come back, who knows what shape they'll be in. So the hope is that we can use some of the COVID funding to replace some of that technology when it comes back, because we don't have a loaner supply. You know what I mean? What we lent out was what we used to run MCAS, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Were we making sure that families that didn't have the highest level of internet, up and out, did we also, especially for those who couldn't afford, were we paying for the difference? Or they could
I
get,
I don't believe we were, because I believe Comcast was running a program called Comcast Essentials that if you met certain criteria, you could get, I believe it was free in-home Wi-Fi for a certain period of time, and then after that, it's a low monthly fee of like $10 a month or something like that. So to my knowledge, Wendy might know if there's been any expense there, but I don't think we've.
I don't think we've incurred it yet, but I do think that there is an anticipation that as the school year starts, if we do have to go to a remote learning environment again, that we may have to purchase some mobile hotspots for some families.
all right. So, any thought from the general public that we've saved money, and I didn't mean to suggest that we would save. It is kind of, it's not a smart way of thinking here.
Well, and just there were other things. There was a lot that, again, with the food that was, the emergency food being supplied to students and their families, we cleared out a lot of our perishables and gave them to the food pantry. So there are a lot of things. We're not starting the year with the normal supplies we would have. We also cleared out all of our PPE and gave it to, the police, the fire, the Board of Health, et cetera. So there will be significant purchases that need to be made just to reopen the doors based on everything that we were able to give to other entities that needed it during the crisis. So it's not, unfortunately, there's no windfall from closing the schools.
Yeah, and there's I just want to also add to we still have a lot more purchases to go. We're looking at some of the expenses now, even that have already been charged to budgets, and looking to see, can we charge some of it to the CARES money? And also for the school department too, the school lunch fund itself, which normally would about break even, was at a loss. So that loss will have to be absorbed by the school budget as well. And we are certainly trying to use whatever other funds are out there too for remote learning, for computers or Chromebooks. There was a DOE grant. I know the school has applied for another technology grant. There will be some additional money for PPE, like per student, but that's mostly going to go towards like the PPE and not the computers. But we're trying to any other funding other than like the town money that we can use for this. We're looking at all of those avenues.
Yeah, and the federal COVID allocation to public K-12 was 13 billion versus there was over, I think it was 110 billion during the Great Recession to help run payroll and keep schools open. So it's the federal allocation thus far has only been a fraction of what it was, and given the crisis we're in and how high unemployment is, it doesn't compare at all. And then a lot of that funding follows Title I allocations, and we are not a town that receives a lot of Title I funding. So there's some of it was kind of handed to the state, and then the state handed to the town, and we've been working and able to use some of that money, but not all of it is being distributed, say, on a per student basis. So it's going to districts that can demonstrate highest need, and the proxy for that is Title I, and we just don't meet those criteria. So we're using every funding resource we can. FEMA, there's some expenses that are FEMA eligible. You know, there's this ESSR grant and COVID relief, and hopefully there'll be more federal funding on the way. Just really hoping.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Ed, but I just had to ask
Jen,
you.
I have one question. It's in regard to the parents that are immunocompromised. Are they being considered, and are they likely to be covered under the COVID funding?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Chuck?
For parents that are immunocompromised,
Mm-hmm.
are they being considered here, and will they likely be covered to some extent in what their needs are by the COVID aspect of the funding?
So, sorry that this, I know we're kind of way off topic, but it's a good question. Every district has to come up with 3 plans for opening school. So there's, or three models of education: in-person learning, hybrid learning, and 100% remote learning. Those are being submitted to the state at the end of this month. And then they'll be released when we get further guidance in August. So there are 7 different committees with over 100 people in town working out plans and taking into consideration things like families where the students would be safest at home because of a variety of reasons. And you know, there's also considerations with staff and their health. So being able to come up with plans that will adequately address the needs of you know, people who really can't, you know, who aren't safe to be in a school setting
Yeah.
is a huge paramount consideration as part of this. But we don't have any more detail right now on what that will look like, but it's certainly at the top of mind for everybody.
It's humongous what you guys are dealing with. And for Ed, I'm sorry, Ed, but yeah, you know as well as anybody that we're not in Kansas anymore. And this year is a lot different than fiscal year 19. And sorry to distract too much from the topic.
No, Chuck, I think this, and you know, I think it is pertinent because I think that FY21 financials, I think they're going to be such an outlier, you know, with COVID
Yeah.
money, different expenses out, that you know, when this committee, with whatever the makeup is it on the time, it's just going to be such an outlier that I don't even know what the value is in comparing them to other years. So,
Yeah, and the question for Ed again is that seeing that this year is a really odd one and an outlier, if a town, if I may be able to intuit this, but if a town is doing an equal job that it did the previous year under an inordinately larger amount of pressure, budgetary pressure, would one still get a AA3 rating, or is the outer environment actually dragging down everyone's credit rating?
It's a great question. And first, I'll start by saying, no need to apologize. This is fantastic conversation, and I think it's very germane to this group and, you know, the charge of the audit committee, and, you know, what to expect when you know, we're having this conversation, whether it's 9 months or a year from now. So this is fantastic, and I've done probably 3 or 4 of these in the last 3 weeks, and this is largely where it gets to. So please, I think this is good stuff. How I'll answer that question right now is, um, I was having a conversation with a town manager, and he was, you know, contemplating, well, do we use stabilization funds? And, you know, it might be looked negatively as far as the bond rating goes, but you got to remember what the point of some of the stabilization funds are, and they're looked at as rainy day funds, and it's pouring right now. So to your point, I think it's a great question, because I would think, everything else being equal, let's say you had a FY21 that mirrored what we're looking at here in FY19. I would imagine that's probably better than some other communities are going to end up. So again, trying to look at it maybe from a simplistic approach, yes, I think it would be looked at as favorably. And I guess I'm looking at this as an introduction into the discussion of the bond rating, and that I think there's going to be some understanding when it comes to looking at the finances of a community. I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all. I do think you're going to have to understand, probably, I think you're going to have to look at historical data to really get a sense as to how the community is doing. But there probably will be an element of how reactionary did they need to be, and
Yeah,
should
so
I have some.
so what
info
so
on
what you may be saying, if I may, is that all other factors may be about equal. However, if X town administrator doesn't respond to the pandemic as well as Y administrator does, then that may be in not only the administrator but the staff and the whole electorate. That might be a factor in bringing them down, relatively speaking.
I think it's certainly possible, yes. If comparing with peer communities, it's going to be tough to tell. To be honest, I wish I had the crystal ball.
Sure.
Okay. We actually had a Moody's call last week. We sold, and we did have a bond sale today. So it's funny that we're talking about this. They reaffirmed our AA3 rating. And I really wasn't concerned that we were going to, be downgraded. I mean, at this point, because everybody's kind of in the same boat.
Yeah.
And I think that we have handled things, as well as we could. Putting in spending freezes, getting wage concessions. And a big thing that some other communities haven't done is that we were able to hold town meeting and pass a budget before June 30th. That was looked upon very favorably also. And we did have to use a little bit of extra money from stabilization, but it wasn't, a significant amount. And one of the things that they referred to in their credit opinion was that the town has maintained stable operations over the last 5 fiscal years because of conservative budgeting. Going forward, we expect the town to maintain satisfactory reserves and liquidity while managing the financial challenges associated with the coronavirus pandemic's impact on the economy. So it was, we had a really good call with Moody's, and we got a really good rate on our debt. And I hate to, take the wind out of the sails, because I know we're going to be talking about this at the select board's meeting on Monday. But we got a really good rate, and we also incorporated a debt refunding from our 2010 bond issue into that as well, which incorporated some debt from the Oliver Ames High School and the middle school renovation project. So we'll have some savings there of about, on the remaining years, of about I think it's about 180,000 over the remainder of that debt term. And also on the stadium, that was part of that 2010 bond issue as well. And that'll save about 20,000, but we'll pretty much take whatever we can get. And it was easy to roll it into this issue.
No, Wendy, congratulations. That's great. I know, you've worked for the town for, decades as far as I know. And that's amazing. I mean, we're lucky to have you at the table. That's for sure. So thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Also, I did check with our people that, work with us for the bond issues. And I said, how are we comparing to these like AAA communities? Like, did anybody else sell debt, around the same time as us? And they did send us a chart, and there's basically about 20 basis points or, 0.2% difference in between like what the AAA communities might get and what a AA community would get. So
good money.
Pretty good. And our true interest cost was 1.29%.
Great. Ed, so I don't want to cut you on time, but I want to get through the discussion in the next half hour, or if you could go through. And then we've got to do our reorganization vote, and then I'll call the meeting. So
no problem.
It's a worthwhile discussion, and because of COVID and reorganization of our committee during the past year and the changes, we haven't met since November. So go right ahead. I didn't.
Sure. Then just so we can get into maybe the management letter, I'll just go over some quick hitters here as that some of which we've already touched on, but again, just kind of looking at trying to focus on some of the more positives before we talk about OPEB and pension. I feel like it always kind of hurts the discussion. I feel like everything's going so good, then you got to bring up pension and OPEB, and I really just suck the air out of the room. So got to always hit on those positive things first.
No.
And again, going back to the rating agencies, are your typical users. So you try to follow some of the guidelines that they put out. And there's been just continued funding of stabilization accounts over the last handful of years. You've been committed to utilizing free cash for capital, out of your general fund. I think that's very critical going into the next piece. And as we're talking about debt, the debt burden, I would say, is a manageable one. The governmental activities debt, which is, call it your general fund and your CPA fund, 86% is paid off in 10 years. That's fantastic. The sweet spot's probably 75%. That's for AAA rated communities. So that's really to the good there. On the business type activity side, your water and your sewer fund, that's a little bit less. That's 52% paid off in 10 years, but that's more expected given the nature of the funds. Because as Wendy talked about earlier, you have more control over the rates, and given the type of infrastructure that you're building, particularly with the sewer fund, and given that for all intents and purposes is still pretty much in its infancy. So you have more startup costs. So that number is a little skewed, but it's nothing that I would be worried about, as Wendy had mentioned. It didn't seem like there were really any issues, but those are just some of the things that we look at and try, how rapid are you paying out your debt? You want to pay it off. You want to pay off a lot of these assets before they stop being in use. Because if you do the opposite, you're really putting yourself in a pickle there. So again, I think a really, really manageable debt burden. And again, everything that all rolls up into the AA3 rating, which is, again, it's high quality, real low credit risk. So looked at as very favorably evidenced by the bond sale. Getting into pension, a little bit of a challenge, as Wendy had talked about, particularly now that Bristol County has some updated actuarial assumptions. PERAC did note that they thought the discount rate was a little bit on the higher side, and some of the assumptions should maybe be married up a little bit with reality. But the good thing to go back to is that there is a funding schedule in place, and the liability as of June 30, 2019 was $40 million. That was up about $7 million over the prior year. 2018 had a horrible year as far as the market went. I think there was probably a $25 million loss in the pension fund that particular year. But then I thought we saw some gains come back in 2019. So we're probably around the 68% funded, as Wendy had mentioned earlier. I always like to go back to the funding schedule, because I think over the last handful of years, we've seen the funding schedules remain pretty much intact. And I was happy with that. COVID is largely going to impact that. I think we all can agree that, with where we've seen the market go, it's likely some of the funded statuses are going to go down, and in turn, some of the amortization schedules might be pushed out a little bit. But again, there is a plan in place. But I think doing what you folks did earlier and looking at that spreadsheet was absolutely fantastic, because I think that's critical in helping folks understanding why there's a pension liability, but more importantly, why there's an OPEB liability. So I think, as Wendy had pointed out earlier, pension, some of it is dealing with some older problems, but there is a little bit of catching up, where OPEB, we're kind of starting from scratch here, as Wendy said, in paying as you go. And having, I think the assets as of June 30 were like $150,000. And because of that, you don't really have a lot of funds to invest. So you're allowed to use the lowest essentially discount rate you can use is the municipal bond index as of June 30, and that was 3.75%. But over time, if you're accumulating more assets that you have to invest, that discount rate is likely to go up, which is going to have a real positive effect on your liability. So I think in looking at, dealing with OPEB, this probably isn't the best year to probably structure something, but I think moving forward and trying to incrementally fund some of the liability is going to be looked at as positive. And in turn, it's going to help your net OPEB liability. And where was I going with that? Oh, the other thing that I think it's important to mention too, because I feel like it gets lost in translation, but when you put money aside in that OPEB trust fund, you can utilize it down the road. It doesn't just stay in this investment vehicle and, ooh, we have the OPEB trust fund, now we can utilize in our actual valuation. No, you can utilize that, as we talk about the fixed costs really eating up more and more of that budget, down the road, that funding can be utilized for retiree healthcare, or the town's portion of retiree healthcare, pardon me. So I always like to bring that up because I feel like more people than not forget that money is something that you can draw on in time. And I think that is, it might sound pretty simple, but I think it's an important piece to bring up here. As of June 30, 2019, the OPEB liability was $117 million. That's down about 9 over the prior year. There were some actuarial gains where the healthcare costs did not end up being as costly as was initially assumed in the valuation. So there were some assumptions that were trued up that helped quite nicely, actually. But nonetheless, it's still a big number and one that over time can be dealt with. But again, I think it's always important to look at, these are long-term liabilities, should be managed as such. You're not going to fund them overnight, but in time, how do we incrementally try to address these? Because again, those are things that are going to help get you to that next level too of the AAA rated communities. Continue being proactive to the extent that you can with pension, but with OPEB. So that was just some quick stuff as we try to get through this. Any other questions maybe before we get into the management letter? Does everyone have a copy of the management letter?
Yes. Wendy sent them out.
Okay. So we go to page 2 and we start with status of prior year recommendations. We have prepare for single audit changes, and what this is related to is the town receives federal awards, and there's what's called uniform guidance or uniform administrative requirements as far as administering those awards. When this came out 4 or 5 years ago, there was an unfortunate requirement that certain policies and procedures and internal controls need to be in writing. And in turn, if they weren't, we issued compliance findings. And that's what this is getting at, is that it's not saying that there are no internal controls, because it was quite the opposite. When we go through and we do our compliance audit, we found things to be in good working order. There is a specific requirement that certain elements need to be in writing. And I believe Wendy has started putting together, we'll call it a little bit of a working draft at this point. We've worked a little bit together on some of the finer points that need to be outlined, but I really call it more of an administrative issue than anything. Number 2, evaluating the indirect cost allocation. This is in relation to the water. I think it's really actually just the water fund, reimbursing the general fund for shared services. I believe, looking back, the amount that was being reimbursed had been updated in a couple of years, and so we issued the comment to largely just take a fresh look and just make sure that the metrics that you're using to reimburse are still in line with the FY19 data at the time. And so for FY19, essentially things stayed the same, but Wendy did update the indirect cost allocation in FY20. So this is really just a kind of pointing it out. We didn't have it for 19, but it's there for 20. So it will be good moving forward.
And I will admit in our struggles to get the budget balanced and everything, it kind of stayed the same for fiscal 21. But we are going to take a look at that for when we basically true things up at the fall town meeting, because in the fall town meeting, we're going to know what state aid is. We'll have growth. We'll have a lot of things that we'll need to do to kind of finalize the fiscal 21 budget. So that's still something that we can look at for that meeting before we set the tax rate.
Thanks. I think that's reasonable.
Going into comment number 3, this is more of an informational comment. GASB 84 was actually due to be effective for FY20. It's been delayed now until FY21, and it's largely just a financial reporting issue. It's depending on how some funds operate. They potentially might be moved from one bucket to another. And the other piece is that in your fiduciary funds, you have what's called an agency funds. Those are now called custodial. And the old financial reporting model just had them showing assets and liabilities. Now there's going to be essentially the equivalent of an income statement where it's going to show fund balance, inflows, and outflows. So really just informational. Work with Wendy, and the chart of accounts is set up to be utilized moving forward. So again, informational, not going to be an issue.
Yeah, the agency funds that we have are primarily the student activity funds for the school and planning board deposits.
Okay.
Moving into comment number 4, improving the timeliness of trust fund transfers. And largely this is really geared towards OPEB. And again, as noted in here, cash was reconciled fine in total. But when you get to some of the specific accounts, OPEB, not for Easton, but just generically, stabilization comes to mind. Is sometimes there might be a transfer that's not made until maybe the following month or in the fall. But as it relates to OPEB, because that asset balance is so critical to the actuarial evaluation, that you really need to be mindful that those bank balances and that general ledger balance, that those are trued up. That way, when the actuary goes through and does the report, everything's going to match. All the activity is going to be representative. You're not going to have these reconciling items. So that's largely where this is coming from, is to try to cut down on some reconciling items. And again, everything was explainable, but it was just more of like, as noted here, kind of truing up, or pardon me, settling up things.
Yeah, so basically the way we keep the books in the general ledger is, we use fund accounting, and we basically have 2 types of cash. We have our general pools cash, and all of the interest earned on that, for the most part, goes to the general fund. And then we also have our trust fund cash. OPEB, stabilization, all of those, they're in the trust fund area. They're invested differently. They're invested in accounts that typically earn higher yields than our general cash. And so if at town meeting we have a trade, we authorize, make a vote to move money into one of those trust funds. Sometimes that doesn't get made the next day or whatever. In this case, this one kind of slipped through the cracks. It was like a $25,000 transfer, I believe, into the OPEB trust. Was voted at the annual town meeting, and it didn't get made until September. I made the journal entry to move the fund balance piece of it, but the cash piece just got made at a later date. But it can have an impact on your OPEB valuation. So we're aware of that, and the treasurer usually does, when she goes to town meeting, try to make note of those transfers and make them, so she doesn't have to wait for me to, have her do that.
Okay, thanks.
Moving into number 5, improving the reconciliation process of ambulance. This is always a tricky one, and one that we've mentioned at other clients. And what communities have are typically outside providers that largely deal with all the billing, the collections, and remitting, and really the reporting of the activity to the communities. They give you this nice spreadsheet. It looks fantastic, but trying to track what actually comes in as far as cash collections and certain billings to when it's outlined by the service provider could be a little tricky. So there are some timing issues and some reconciling items that need to be dealt with. And what we're recommending here is that I think monthly is having a documented, whether it's an Excel file or something of the like, just trying to true up the activity from we'll call it the remittance files or the schedules that are provided from the ambulance company to what Wendy's essentially tracking in the general ledger. So it's really just making sure that there's always going to be reconciling items, and it's just,
Right.
I think it's important to have something in place to to be able to deal with some issues if they were to arise. So it's just a standard control. That's all. Just to help with the reconciliation process, because it can be a cumbersome one. So that's why we're saying.
Oh, sorry about that.
Doesn't like that comment.
Yeah, the thing with the ambulance receivables too is that there are so many small little payments. It's a lot of activity, and when we also switched from Comstar to Pro EMS, there was a little bit of confusion when the money would come in from Medicare. Whose receipt was it? Was it the new provider? Was it the old provider? So the treasurer reconciles basically the information that the billing provider sends to us, because we pay a percentage of collection. So she's always looking at that to make sure that we're not paying more than what we have to. But we needed to take that a step further and make sure that the receipts are basically falling into like the right bucket. If it was the old provider, the new provider, and then account for the timing differences on the reports issued by the billing provider, and then comparing that to when we actually did get the money. So my assistant's working on that now.
Just trying to continue on here. Number 6 was establish a credit card use policy and procedures, and Wendy has provided a draft copy already. So already looking to try to check the box there.
Yes.
So
that'll actually be going out tomorrow, and I can send the committee a copy of that. I just kind of wanted to wait till I sent it out to everybody first.
Okay, that's fine.
As will get a surprise.
And lastly, the last comment on the manager letter was prepare for GASB statement number 87. Again, this is really informational. It's one that it's not going to be very difficult to implement. It's changing in the governmental world. In dealing with leases, you had operating leases and you had capital leases, and now those are kind of going away, and you're evaluating the contract and really what is happening and evaluating a right to use. And that's going to be effective for FY22. That also got delayed. So again, from an audit standpoint, the accounting of it in the financial statements isn't going to be really a challenge, but I think identifying all these types of arrangements is really what's going to be tricky, because I think there's going to be situations where the town might lease land to for cell phone towers. So it's going to go both ways. Pardon me. You have a lease liability, but you're also going to have a lease receivable. So trying to identify some of these odds and ends that you really don't think about maybe once a year or sometimes once every couple of years when you renew something. That's from the audit community side of things. That's where I think is the big risk is. So we've already talked. This has been out for certainly over a year now. So we've already started the conversation with Wendy, and that's going to be critical, is the identification process, and that's where we're going to need the help in trying to see what type of arrangements might be out there. So again, I don't think it's going to be an issue to implement, but we're certainly going to be looking for some help there. I'm out of breath right now. My apologies. I was really trying to stick to that 7:55 here. That's the management letter. I'll pause there and see if there's any other further questions, but I really wanted to try to stick to my time there.
Okay. Did anything on the financials pop out at you as being different, or not really? Like changes from prior year?
I don't think so. Again, I think in looking at some of the key funds, when you're looking at the general fund, the Community Preservation Act fund, things are really trending in the right direction. Stabilization as well. I will say maybe in the water fund, when you look at this, certainly from a gap perspective, you'll see that the change in net position went down about $300,000. That's largely due to significant depreciation. So that's an unbudgeted cost from a, when you're setting the recap, you're not looking, the, DOR accounting is cash basis. So, when we try to have these conversations, so how do we explain the change? Well, I try to look at it from what's budgeted from a cash perspective that on a GAAP basis isn't, but then what is not budgeted, but on a GAAP basis is an expense. So the two things that we compare is pretty much your principal debt service in comparison with your depreciation. And there's, because I think the debt service is fairly low in the water fund, you're only paying about $150,000 a year versus $832,000 in depreciation. So that's really driving the decrease in the water fund. But as Wendy said earlier, I think with some of the increase in the rates, you're going to look at some recapture there. So did it surprise me? No. But for this discussion, given that it's so limited with some of the things that maybe did or didn't surprise me, I guess I just wanted to point that out. But I think from the health of the fund, things are still operating pretty well. But that, I just want to point that out. When you're looking at when you're looking at the enterprise funds, you have to consider that depreciation is not budgeted.
Okay. Yeah, the other thing too is that as you look at, you get basically the two perspectives on the financial statements. So you've got the statement in that position, and then you've got the fund financials, which are more of what fund financials are more what we're really used to looking at, and the statement in that position is more like full accrual. And it also includes the pension liability and the OPEB liability. And the OPEB liability, because we're on a pay-as-you-go basis, you're going to see basically that net position in the general fund go up every year.
Yeah.
But, we're not the only community with that problem.
No, you're not. And that's why, before I forgot, Wendy, thank you for that. But I think it's important to look at your cash flow statement too. That's fantastic for the enterprise funds, because you can see that the fund's generating enough cash to certainly pay for capital and pay for the related debt service. So those are good things to look at. But just to try to answer that question, I think things look pretty good. I believe that. I think there's many positive things to take away from this document. The unfortunate reality is that, like everyone else, pension and OPEB seem to dominate the conversation, and that's really where the questions come and the dialogue turns to.
Yeah, we have to do it. So, yeah, it's the nature of the beast, I suppose. All right, and look, Ed, thanks. Wendy, when are we looking to finalize the drafts?
I'm sorry, what was that? Sorry.
To finalize the drafts on the.
Actually, the financial statements, we had to have those finalized.
And you said that in an email to me. When were they finalized?
But we will be finalizing the management letter this week.
Okay, great.
Yep, we'll get that turned around for you.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I nothing on the management letter really popped out. I mean, I guess some of those GASBs are new. We had talked about the single payer in our last meeting as well. Mm-hmm. Obviously a lot of distractions. I'm sure, we're in the right direction on that. So, all right, thanks. That's great. Okay. Hey, Ed, does anyone have any questions for Ed? And I do appreciate you coming by and meeting with us at night, as usual.
My pleasure.
Okay. Anyone have any questions? Okay. Thanks again, Ed.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ed.
Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you.
Good night.
Okay, great.
Have a good one.
Okay. Okay. With that, it's 8 o'clock. Before we go, I do want to do the reorganization vote, vote on a chair. Oh, never, my dog goes again. And he's absolutely seeing nothing. Like I said, I've got one more year, less than a year, on my term, and I don't plan on, just because I won't. I'm hoping not to be around for 3.5. This will be it for me. I'm certainly going to be in the town for the next 5 years till I retire, 5.5. But I'd be happy to, in June. But if anybody else wants to be chair, that's fine as well. So
I nominate Berkowitz.
Second.
Chuck,
Okay, I'll do a roll call vote. Chuck,
Berkowitz,
Nenstar,
Yes, for Berkowitz.
thank you. Jennifer, Stacy,
Stacy Berkowitz.
thank you. Steve,
Marsh, Berkowitz.
thanks. Okay, and I'll vote for myself as well. I enjoy this, and I'm looking forward to the next year. I doubt the financials will be ready for the reorganization, but they should be interesting next year.
Fido nominates Berkowitz as well.
Yeah.
Not to the record, though.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Hey, quiet. All right. So we'll meet again. I think sometime in the fall, and I guess I'll work. I just wanted. I think the theme on the next meeting is Wendy's. After everything is said and done, with this year and with COVID, certainly updates to the financial position of the town, as well as to what the school's doing, and if anything changes, I'd like to discuss. Hey.
Do you want to meet in? Do you want to meet in November?
I would like to. I don't know if anything else is going to significantly change, but yeah, I mean, I'd like to keep meeting at least twice a year.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'll circulate emails as we get closer to the fall, and one of the topics I wanted to go through was just an update to how we're doing, and judging by the meeting today, I would say town administrator, school committee, or I had no idea, because I'm so out of touch with things now. But the town administrator and the school committee seem to be all over the changes, and just
Yes.
yeah.
There's no way to avoid being all over them. Like we're out of money, and
No,
we have business to do. So
you guys are doing great. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I always step out, and then I try to think, as just a regular citizen, I just think, it's amazing, what you guys do, especially, in COVID. It's, and just everyone involved with the schools. I mean, that's the biggest enterprise we have, and I'm amazed. So thanks.
thank you. Also, got to give the select board has been meeting a lot, and has done great work supporting local businesses with turning around outdoor dining permits and things like that. So I think that's you definitely want to give a lot of credit to the select board for all the extra work they've been doing with supporting local businesses and trying to help them adapt to these changes. And I know the businesses appreciate them. I see more and more being able to pop their tables and umbrellas outside and get some customers coming in, which is of course great for the town too, because we need those local receipts.
Yeah.
To
No,
try to recover.
I seem to go to the one that has no problem making money, and maybe that's why I go there, because they're I won't mention their name, but they're on 106. So I'm gonna make, we'll get back, we'll meet in November before the holidays. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Any second?
Do
Oh, go ahead.
we haven't done a vice chair?
Oh, I'm sorry. Is anyone interested before we nominate in being vice chair? Steve, it might be, since you are not from a committee, we would like to look to you, the at-large people on the committee, which is you and me.
It's fine. I'll need some guidance on how everything works. I'm new to it. But absolutely.
You'll pick it up at the next, more, you've been through one, you'll go through the next meeting. I'll tell you this, when I got on the committee, first, there's no, except for Wendy, there's nobody similar. People have been on there forever, and I didn't say a word. I was pretty nervous. I had been on FinCom, like, I don't know, maybe it was 15, 18 years ago. So, but I have been totally out of it, but I think, you'll be fine, and it'll be good experience. And I would hope that you would serve a second term and, run the committee.
Sure, absolutely.
So I'll nominate you. Do I have any seconds?
Second.
Okay. We'll do the roll call vote, I guess. Berkowitz, yes. Or I should say Berkowitz for Marsh. Chuck?
King, Marsh? Yes.
And Star?
Star for Marsh. Yes.
Okay. Stacy?
Stacy for Marsh.
Thank you. And Marsh? You're gonna vote?
Marsh for Marsh.
Okay. Thank you. And so I think I'm safe in bringing a motion to adjourn. Any seconds?
Second?
Yeah.
King.
Can we just do it all in favor on this one?
No, it's
Do a roll call, fine. Berkowitz?
Yep.
Berkowitz, yes. Adjourn?
King, yes.
Star, yes.
Stacy, yes.
Steve?
Marsh, yes.
Thank you. And next meeting, we'll approve the minutes of this meeting, which is important, and go through update COVID or anything else on the financials. And Wendy, we are going to ask you on the management report, the recommendations, how we're progressing. So,
Yep, I will send a finalized version of that with the town's responses in there as
Great.
well.
Okay, thank you. And I'm hoping we can keep that one to an hour, and we'll get someone from Melanson at the spring meeting or whenever, if drafts are available, then great.
Yeah, they should be. We don't need to do an OPEB evaluation this year. It's just an update.
Yep, that's
So,
every other year.
that always makes a difference.
I'm sure it's nice for you. So,
Yes.
okay, all right. Thank you, everyone. And again, my apologies to anyone watching the video for not having a meeting earlier. I just tried to make it so that everyone could make it, cognizant of Roberta, and then I just didn't know if we were supposed to meet during COVID or not. I apologize. That's on me. So thanks, everybody, and good night. All right.
Good night.
Night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye all.